You're listening to Surely a Mystery, straight from Long Beach Island, New Jersey. We're here to share with you all the spooky, scary, and mind-bending enigmas that make up the Jersey Shore. I'm your living host, Anna, here with some mystery, history, and a few tips to proper ghost hunting. So why don't we get started? An abandoned asylum is kind of obvious that it might probably be highly haunted. I mean, what a better place to have ghosts after the place closes down or is forced to close down? All the violence or just the plain human neglect and inhuman conditions. All mental hospitals have people within their walls who suffer from true mental illnesses, as well as the nurses, doctors, and orderlies who also can suffer from them too. Others may actually develop their mental issues from the constraints and rules of the current society. How society treats these people can literally make you sick. Oftentimes, women who do not follow the rules or who are acting too independent were put into these places simply to get rid of them and put them out of sight. Those who were classified as mentally retarded or who had other physical defects could also be put there. Society didn't really know how to deal with people who weren't considered normal. In past history, those with defects would be usually put into the basement or hidden away in the dark recesses of the house, like the attic. In ancient times, in Sparta and other societies, they would literally kill any children with defects. Although some of these children might escape and move elsewhere, it still didn't change the fact that society placed expectations on their offsprings. In New Jersey society, you couldn't just let them be killed. I spoke in a previous episode about the history of the Jersey Devil, and a whole family was made fun of because some of their children were considered less than perfect. The father also lost standing in society because of it. It is seen as a defect in the family genes, not as a defect in the potential of the child. It was people and their ancestors who were considered at fault. There was obviously something in the family's past which was terribly wrong. Now today, we consider the predictions for their potential of what they can do and their possibilities. What can these people contribute to our modern society? Since we have medicines and other medical breakthroughs, society treats these members of society differently. This topic will and can certainly fill 2 episodes at least. So I'm going to cover Bridgeton Asylum and Skillman Institute in another episode, as well as any others that I find. I, of course, will cover Essex County in this part of this episode because it has the most investigations as well as been on television multiple times. Let's begin with Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. It started out as the New Jersey State Lunatic Asylum. In 1848, the asylum started with only 86 patients, and Dr. Budloff was a decent man who provided excellent care for his patients as chief medical officer. But in 1907, Dr. Cotton took over. He believed that mental illness was caused solely by infections. And since antibiotics were not in wide use nor really understood, he would pull teeth, cut off anything that was infected. Many patients died due to actual infections, not to their mental illness or initial infection. In the end, 45% of his patients from 1907 to 1930 died due to what he did to them. In 1925, he was actually reviewed and investigated, but they found that his cutting-edge treatments were so good for his patients and for the science of mental health. How? Seriously. So after he retired, the institution continued to remove and cut off and out things until the late 1950s. Today, the facility is actually still open and can accommodate about 450 souls. It is still active and in use. So this place is a little hard to investigate because it is in active use, and it's not like you can just shut off the lights and go to every part of the institution. But if you do get permission to investigate, I suggest you stay away from the Anne Klein Forensic Center. Let's just say I find it weird that Anne Klein, the queen of fashion, has a ward for the most criminally and violently insane named after her. This is the place where the most patient-on-patient assaults in all of New Jersey happen. The obvious place to investigate would be the lab, because that's where Dr. Cotton did most of his horribly cruel experiments. The next might be the women's ward, since most of the women in this ward died because they were actually being experimented on. But the building with the most activity reported is the Frost building. However, there is no apparent reason why it is. No one can point to anything historically significant or specific. Before we continue, let's review the different types of possible EVP evidence. These voice recordings can be something that comes in Class A, B, or C formats. It's a system of cataloging and categorizing, which was developed by Konstantin Radov, and is called the Radov scale. Class A is considered the best to collect, but it's the one that every investigator wants to record but will rarely ever get to. Voices can be heard and identified by anyone with normal hearing and knowledge of the language spoken by that area or location. Basically, anyone, even if they don't believe in paranormal stuff, can understand and figure out what's being said. Think like a clear recording of a conversation, or at least like short phrases. You might consider clear crying or human utterances might fall into this, as long as one can figure that it's human, and you might even be able to tell the gender or even the age of the ghostly voice. It's like you can tell a deep-throated man versus a little girl talking. The second is Class B. It's a little less clear. The ghosts appear to speak more rapidly or slowly, so it's a little hard to hear it clearly. Think of those as the one you might hear on like Ghost Adventures or Ghost Hunters, and you kind of have to guess what it says. I have to say that sometimes what those guys think the recording says and what I think it does are totally two different things. But that's why these are called Class B. Someone can figure out that the ghost is saying something, but it's not easily 100% sure what it is. People realize that with some help or by slowing it down, that it can be figured out, or at least you can really make an educated guess. Now, Class C phenomena, or recorded EVPs, are actually the most common because they are the easiest to catch. However, it still needs to be proven that you're not just catching a recording of non-paranormal noises. These are like fragments, or might not be a person actually talking. I kind of put knocks, pops, groans into this category too. I mean, you have to prove that the setting of the house or abandoned place is really paranormal and not the effects of barometric pressure or temperature. The problem is that much of ghost hunting interpretation can be subjective or cultural. So, like an orb could simply be dust or bugs. Most ghost hunting places are old and decaying. So you obviously need to rule out all environmental factors. If you track orbs to see if they're moving forward and then back, or have been changing colors or size, or even stay stationary, literally, they do have a mind of their own, or if they appear to have some kind of intention behind them. According to most ghost hunters, Dr. Cotton's ghost can often be seen, but for some reason, it's never been photographed. Patients with missing limbs are often seen, but again, never photographed. Many state that they will see patients who are no longer living. Remember, this is a working facility with live, warm-blooded people. Disembodied voices are often recorded, but the EVPs are hard to interpret. And that could be just a byproduct of the fact that these ghosts are, well, insane. They might have their own language or way of communicating. So my bet is to just ask night security guards or nurses who've worked there long hours and see their point of view or what experiences that they are willing to share. One nurse said, "It's hard sometimes to know whether the screams you hear are real or some lost dead person calling out to you." Another current security guard said that it often feels like there's someone walking or limping behind you. It's like those horror movies where the villain is dragging their leg behind them. That kind of noise. I might ask their current clients, but it might be hard to know if they're seeing ghosts due to mental issues or actual real experiences. Our next place is New Jersey Sanatorium for Tuberculosis Diseases, aka Glen Gardner. It was a state-owned sanitarium for the care of 500 expected cases of TB. It originally looked like a cottage-style facility, and the reason was that they believed in free space and lots of clean, fresh air for the patients as the best way to recover from the disease. It also includes the Senator Garrett W. Hagdorn Psychiatric Hospital. So in 1907, the facility broadened their focus to all chest diseases. And in later years, it became a 288-bed psychiatric hospital. From about 1907 to 1929, there were actually more than 10,000 patients who were treated there. It expanded to serve different types of mental cases and those who needed long-term care. But in 2011, all remaining facilities were actually closed, and to this day, many areas sit vacant or rotting. The site, including the former sanitarium buildings, are now part of the Hagdorn Preserve. It's a natural trust land trust managed by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. This place falls under the idea of few standing buildings or parts of buildings and lots of forest with hiking. So here is where we start to do investigations at night, but make sure that you have great flashlights and extra batteries. There are so many times that people learn the hard way that the energy is often sucked out of their batteries, and investigators are left with literally no light. These ghosts need power. Think of energy as their food. In order to manifest or give you a hint that they're even there, they need to steal energy in some form. It's not just light or any other sources like chemicals. They'll even take your own energy, which you generate, and some see that energy as auras. We went for a hike, and there were these weird noises. At first, it sounded like branches being stepped on and breaking, but we looked and stopped and looked even closer, and there was no one around. We really couldn't see any animals. Then we started walking again. The noises seemed to get louder, like a person was literally right next to us, or super close. But again, we couldn't see anyone, said one hiker. Then, of course, there are others who see orbs in photos or in real life, almost like mini floating ghosts, or some say souls looking to manifest. Ghost orbs, also known as spirit orbs, are typically described as small, circular, and often glowing orbs of light that appear in photographs or videos, particularly in contexts related to paranormal investigations. They are frequently associated with ghost sightings or spiritual presence, but it's important to note that while some individuals believe orbs are proof of paranormal activity, they are actually more than likely natural occurrences. So you might want to check the pollen or dust count in the area, make sure your camera lens is clean, maybe even take multiple Polaroids. Trail cameras are like the best, great news source of photographic documentation. I was out there with a friend and it was getting dark. I kept looking back at my friend and there was this like little orb thing behind her. It seriously looked like it could be following her. and I thought it was just a light off in the distance behind her. But then it actually changed color and it got closer to her, said another hiker. Of course, let us return to the insane. Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital, aka State Asylum for the Insane, is in Morris Plains, New Jersey. This sprawling complex originally covered about 1,000 acres and began in construction in 1877. At one time, it had upwards of 7,000 patients. Many were considered the most mentally ill people in the United States. The problem was it was only constructed for 350 patients. The history of this place makes the energy ripe with ghosts. In 1881, they converted most of the attic spaces into patient living spaces. And then only 6 years later, they had to turn all the exercise room into more patient rooms. So where do they exercise? Outside? No way. What about all those patients who have ADD or ADHD and other mental illnesses? Have you ever heard of the term stir crazy? Overcrowded and understaffed. Then there were the escapes, both attempted and succeeded. Injuries, spreading of general but often curable diseases. Many died in 1895 due to the typhoid fever outbreak. Many buildings began to be abandoned around about the 1970s because of the invention of new drugs and the changing attitudes about what to do with people who are mentally ill. Also, what the definition of being mentally ill had also changed. Finally, in 2008, the facility was forced to shut down. The buildings were also already falling apart because the owners really neglected to do minor repairs, so patients had begun to be shipped to other facilities. And the fires of this facility were notorious. In 1930, a particularly horrible one happened. They said that the cause was because of bad electrical wiring. Other fires were caused because patients set them, or understaffing people. Well, they just couldn't get there fast enough to contain the damage. Even famous people were sent there. In 1956 to 1961, Woody Guthrie spent time there. He actually had Huntington's disease, and that eventually proved terminal. The buildings there eventually were demolished in 2015. But the tales do not end there. It's now called Greystone Park, a park with ghosts. If you drive along Mountain Meadows Circle, you might see a girl walking across the grass, but her feet don't quite touch the ground. You might think you see people in the trees that line the street, and in certain parts you can see the remnants of buildings. Some security and police talk about the calls, which start with, "There is this woman and she looks like she's drunk and wandering around." And then when the officers arrive, there's no one there. Some drivers will talk about a nondescript person running across the road. The wind is also said to make unusual noises like moaning or groaning. Even though most of the buildings are no longer there, it doesn't mean that the spirits have left. The energy has literally soaked into the ground. The foundations of these buildings are still there, so they're still vibrating with all that collected energy. Maybe you try taking a walk at night or on days when the veil is thin, like Halloween. This area is strewn mostly with noises and possible EVPs. Many of the locals say that it's just the vibe of the area, or the overall feeling that makes you not want to spend a lot of time there. Well, let's see. In 1931, we have Marlborough Psychiatric Hospital, which New Jersey added, and it remained active for over about 70 years, run by the state of New Jersey. It treated only adults and adolescents after 1978, but before then it was any age. Behind and near the facility, there are actually 924 unmarked graves, which people can visit because the bodies were left unclaimed by their families. In the 1970s, many patients died of food poisoning, but But in the 1980s and 1990s, deaths were due to rampant patient abuse, including patients going missing who were never found, or many patients were actually choked to death because orderlies were trying to control them, but they weren't properly trained on restraint techniques. Many also died simply because of untreated illnesses. In 1998, they closed it. Then, it was like, what to do with it? So much horror and death had occurred. So they tried to sell it. The local government tried to make it something different, but nothing would take. And it required a massive and expensive cleanup before demolition. Right now, it's simply a park area. Although there are lots of local legends, it is considered to be toxic with all the asbestos. There are many also various wild animals. The demolition was not done so well, so there are actually voids which exist and can cause many people to have broken arms or legs, or worse, disappear forever. Just because a place is torn down doesn't mean that the ghosts suddenly disappear. I mean, have you ever been to Gettysburg? Or any battlefield for that matter? The energy is still there. Maybe even more bodies than we know about. Since 2015, the land has been barren, but the ghost stories are still there. Not just because of the people who are in the hospital, but some actually say because of a murderous farmer who would lure victims and then kill them in his slaughterhouse on the grounds. Were the food poisoning incidents actually because they ate dead people? How many of the missing patients ended up as food or sausage bits that were later sold to the public? Our next one is Overbrook Asylum in Cedar Grove, New Jersey. We also know it as Essex County Hospital Center. And it's our last of the haunted asylums that I'm going to cover for this episode, but the one that has or had the most evidence. For example, Ghost Adventures starring Zach Bagans spent time there exploring the buildings, the tunnels, the morgues in one of their episodes. It started in 1826 in Verona, New Jersey. They needed an sanitarium, so the government purchased approximately 325 acres of land. It received the nickname of Overbrook because its buildings were overlooking the Peckman River. It was always at full capacity, meaning especially in the 1940s and 1950s. For example, there were thousands of patients at a time. It even had its own train stop on the local Erie Railroad, which brought in food and coal to the complex. The hospital also had its own farming area, which fed the patients too. They allowed inmates from jail to work on the farm at the psychiatric hospital, even though they paid a farmer to oversee the whole process. The complex even had its own bakery and a fire station. Lastly, it had its own semi-professional baseball team, which competed against other towns. But it's not too clear if the patients were on the team or not. But I would believe that low-risk mental or temporary patients probably were allowed to play, especially if they were pretty good at baseball. In the 1960s and 70s, there were new medications which were developed in the United States, as well as new ways to treat temporary mental illnesses. The number of patients in the facilities across the country decreased dramatically and quickly. So many buildings at Overbrook were either outdated or completely not used because of the new mental practices. Once the 1990s occurred, the buildings were more and more abandoned. People started to sneak on the property and investigate them. They had heard stories about the place, so they frankly were just plain curious. Finally, in 2007, it was decided that the complex would be closed and made into about a 90-acre park. However, stories of formerly released mental patients who would return to hide out in its many abandoned buildings started cropping up. They obviously had nowhere else to go, so they went to the places they knew. The problem was that it literally became a rite of passage for gangs and local teams to check out the asylum. So, over time, it was considered a public eyesore. And in 2018, they began to slowly demolish the buildings one by one, when they could afford to do it. The stories about the facilities go back to the worst thing that happened in 1917. Because they had no steady heating, about 24 patients in less than 20 days froze to death. And they're the ones that we know of. The staff tried to get families to take their loved ones home to prevent more injuries or deaths, but they really had no one to claim them. The best story was that over the years, many patients would go missing and never accounted for. Although there were just about 150 documented in just 1978 alone, there were many, many more who quote-unquote disappeared. Free bed equals new paying clients, so the facility really didn't care. For example, one escaped man stole a carving knife from a local house, kidnapped a housewife, stole her car, fled to Pennsylvania, where he was later caught. So, to make more money for the demolitions, the government even rented it out to a movie called Choke for 9 days of shooting. The star Angelica Houston came away with her own tales of ghost encounters. Furthermore, the crew who worked on it said that they would never work there again. So the word was actually out in the film industry, and no film crew or location manager would book the place in the future. Until, finally, Extreme Ghost Adventures booked the place and made it ghostly famous on the Discovery Network. And that kind of makes sense. What makes or made this place hard to investigate was that many patients escaped through underground tunnels connecting all the buildings. Parts of these tunnels have collapsed and others are just completely shut off. But most still exist if you can find an entrance. Today, there is still a small hospital on the grounds and several storage buildings. Many of the surrounding grounds are actually filled with single-family residences and even a police training station. But many residents are still feeling the effects of the place, well, at least paranormally. The ghosts that were and still being encountered by many, even in EVPs, more along the line of Class A and B variety. The third floor originally had ghosts of multiple children who passed on that floor. However, now that there's no buildings, so many of the EVPs and apparitions are literally floating around the area. Most of the documented evidence is now seriously considered historical. You can watch various documentaries on YouTube or Ghost Adventures to see the past and decide whether or not you hear the EVPs and what you think you see in the footage. But for today, one woman said, I was jogging early in the morning and not really paying attention, but there was this eerie feeling. I kept looking for someone behind me because it just felt like there was someone there. Or something, I don't know. I finally stopped and completely turned around, and there was no one until I looked in the forest tree line, and there was this weird-looking guy just standing staring at me. So I ran as fast as I could to get away from there. A local police officer even stated, I hate driving by the area. Sometimes I just get this creepy, weird feeling. Then if you put your window down, you can hear these weird noises, almost screams. You literally have to decide if you have enough courage to investigate. So we always send the rookies to do it, and we end up making fun of them when they don't find anything. A young father said that his kid was riding his bike and came back to report that he talked to some nice old lady. He rode off, and she just disappeared. The guy said, I was more freaked out because my kid was like, okay, she was there and then not. It really didn't faze him. The problem is many of these places have been almost completely demolished. So the objects or buildings which had power or had the spirits trapped in them are now gone. I would be curious if the scrap copper sold to people was also haunted. I mean, remember, there was that salvaged Florida aircraft parts that were from a tragic airplane crash, and they sold them to various other airplanes and stuff, and they got installed, and then people started seeing ghostly apparitions. However, the cemetery is still there. So, how many would like to investigate that and tape the EVPs there? There are still bodies there, they say, waiting for people to give them energy. Maybe that's why the screams are still there and other human sounds that can be heard over the wind in the middle of the night. If I were you, I would do a nighttime picnic or try and find that cemetery area. Put out a ghost box or other equipment and see what you get. Snap pictures or multiple Polaroids. Trust me, you'll probably get something. On the next Surely a Mystery, I'm thinking about tackling haunted prisons. Okay, that seems obvious. The same problem is going to happen because some of these prisons are actually demolished. But the nice thing is that many of them are currently being used as Halloween or ghost hunt attractions. So until then, keep searching for the hidden histories around you, which make up where you live as being an interesting place to live. This has been Anna, your living host from LBI, New Jersey, bringing you the histories and mysteries of New Jersey on Surely a Mystery.